All right, everybody. So it is Chipp Norcross here with Gabriel Baldinucci. We are going to spend the next minute or so waiting for people to join the meeting. And then we'll go ahead and get started. So if you are on, go ahead, sit tight. We know we are going to be collecting people over the next minute or two, and then we'll start our webinar, Preparing Your Family to Succeed in an Exponential World. All right, so it looks like we got about 30 or so attendees so far. We'll give it another 30 seconds or so to be able to let everybody come on, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today, Preparing Your Family to Succeed in an Exponential World. My name is Chipp Norcross. I'm joined by my colleague and friend here, Gabriel Baldinucci.
Hello, everyone.
And we're in Miami today.
Yes,
we actually, which is a place that's near and dear to both of us as former Miami residents. I lived here for about 11 years. Gabe was here for how long?
3 years.
3 years. So we happened to be in town and coordinating a visit to Miami when we were planning this webinar. So excited to be here in the Magic City, excited to be back in South Florida, and excited to be hosting all of you for today's webinar, Preparing Your Family to Succeed in an Exponential World. So to get started, we wanted to talk a little bit about who we are, and this is our first Exponential Families webinar. So for those of you that might not be as familiar with Exponential Families, what we're planning currently, why we've started this part of SU. We wanted to give a very quick overview on that and just a little bit more background on who the two of us are. So I'm guessing that for many people who are here on the call today, you might have come to an executive program, you might have come to an exponential innovation program, another one of our open enrollment programs over the last few years. And you may know me from there. I've spent the last 4 years here at SU running open enrollment and our EPs, EIPs, and other programs as well. So, you know, for me, getting involved in Exponential Families is a really exciting opportunity to be able to really start to serve this part of SU that has been asking us for different ways to support them for a long time. We've done a great job of supporting the executives, of the entrepreneur, of large enterprises, but families has been a place where I think there's a clear opportunity for us to be able to get more engaged in working with families that are looking to be able to create their future and think about their role in society. And Gabe is here, who's been here. You've been at SU now for what, 7.5 years?
7.5 years, yeah.
And Gabe, for those of you who have not met him before, in addition to being SU's Chief Strategy Officer, focusing on strategy and special projects for the last 7+ years, also you've got an extensive background in venture capital and private equity and entrepreneurship in the family office, as well as working at Virgin, where I know a lot of the lessons that you learned from Virgin, and specifically Virgin USA, which was the Virgin startup companies, it would do startup companies here in the US, is really applicable to this entire demographic. So Gabe, can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think the exposure to family offices, my time at Goldman or in Greenwich with the Family Office Association, combined with the years at SU, were really the catalyst to seeing how we could modify what we teach at SU to better fit families who are more institutional. And so we're going to be sharing some of that today and some of the thoughts that come out of it. But it was the combination of those experiences that kind of led to this, which we started last year. And nothing, as Chipp mentioned, the executive programs, the enterprise programs really didn't fit. And so we'll share a little bit about what we want to turn this into.
And just for context, we've got about an hour that we'll spend with you here. We're really looking at about the first 40 minutes that we'll be sharing some of our perspective and information with you. And then we've got some time for questions for the last 20 minutes or so. So do plan on asking questions. If there are any that come up, please go ahead and submit them. We want to make sure that we do get to those as well. But we want to start off by talking a little bit about this topic of how you can prepare your family. And, as Gabe has switched on to this slide here, what we're looking to do is really use Exponential Families as a platform to be, as it says here, the leading global community of families that think exponentially and leverage exponential technologies to create a better future for us all. This is, in a lot of ways, our massive transformative purpose as a group, as what we're working with, and what we're really hearing from a lot of families that we've been engaged with that they want to be involved with as well.
Yeah, the opportunity here, families in many parts of the world control the economy, the resources, the businesses. They have the most to gain and the most to lose, often with a lot of illiquid assets and a time of disruption. And they're in the best position really to move quickly and to drive positive change in the world. And so we really think that families can be a global force to have a positive impact. And that's one of the reasons we're really excited about creating this.
Yeah. So as we think about, as we've thought about, what do we advise families that are starting to think of in this way and wanting to engage on this kind of a purpose with us? There are really three things that are going to provide the framework for the rest of this conversation about how you can start to think about preparing your family for an exponential world. The first one is really what we just call staying ahead. And it's this idea of how do you catch up and stay ahead of all of the news of technology and the implications that technology has for society overall. Society, and whether it's economic, political, environmental, all of the different components that surround us. Technology is creating opportunities for us to be able to solve problems that we've never been able to solve before, but it's also presenting challenges that we need to really think carefully about overcoming and preventing possible downside risk as well. The second piece of a framework here that we're going to be focusing in on is the idea of taking care of business. So how can you leverage the insights that you learn to think differently about what your family businesses might be operating in, what your investments might be focused upon, and also how you think about philanthropic activities and where your family's focus and time and investments can be best leveraged. And then our final piece today that we'll talk about is how you think about taking care of the family in a time of exponential technology and change. And really the two components that we're going to focus most clearly on there are about preparing the next generation, what's happening in the different impacts of the future of education and the future of learning, and getting younger people involved earlier in the family and the family's businesses and family's activities, as well as looking across the spectrum of age about health, longevity, and being able to prepare for a future where some of our assumptions that we've had about lifespan and basic health and wellness may be completely changed as we look at these technological breakthroughs to come over the next decades.
Yeah, and it was really those three pillars that kind of led to us organizing ourselves into these 6 buckets. On staying ahead, it's the technology advancements, but it's also the societal implications, as Chipp mentioned. What do they mean? We know, if you've been to any SU program, that the pace of change is disrupting our institutions, political, social, economic, environmental, how you consume media. So that is something that's moving under your feet. Second, taking care of business. The first is about wealth creation, wealth preservation, but it's also about impact and legacy and the unique opportunities that we have now to do well and do good at the same time, to use business as a force for good. And if you're a family, you have a unique opportunity to leave a significant impact and align that with some of your other objectives. And then finally, preparing the next generation is always an issue. And for families that hope to have multi-generational impact, stewarding assets, influence in the world, the next generation is critical. But also, we're at a unique time in history we're going to talk about later on. for helping preserve the health and longevity of the previous generations and the whole family. So these are the things we're going to be focused on with Exponential Families going forward, and kind of supporting our community.
Yep. So we're going to go ahead and spend some time looking at each one of those 3 different areas. We're going to start off with staying ahead of technology and its implications. So, for those of you on this call, I'm presuming that many of you have been to an SU program or been involved with SU in some way in the past. But I think one of the things that is really important as we talk about the idea of staying ahead of the curve is that it's not only important to catch up to what's happening today. It's also important to stay ahead. And we talk about staying ahead really purposefully, because it is, if you learn about everything that's happening in technology one year and then you take the next couple of years off, you're going to be behind. You're going to be behind because there are going to be new technological breakthroughs that happen, but perhaps more importantly, it is the confluence of all of these technological breakthroughs that is really going to be creating pressures on society, or pressures in the different components of the world around us in ways that we might not have been able to foresee, even a couple of years ago. So as you're really looking at the full scope of everything that is surrounding you, staying up to date, not just on the technology, but on its implications is critically important. And a big part of the focus behind this is just how fast these breakthroughs are coming. And the idea that every year you're seeing a doubling of breakthroughs in different areas of technology, and what does it mean then if you have ubiquitous energy? What does it mean if you're suddenly able to? I think it was last November when the news about the first gene-edited babies were born, and that happened I think at the very beginning of an executive program, and the fact that from 1 week we were having a very different conversation in our digital biology session than we had been the previous week, when that was not news that anybody had known about. So staying up to date on all of this information, on all of the changes that are happening is a critically important thing to do. And we're gonna share some resources about how you can do that, whether it's with SU or whether it's all of the different channels where you can be able to find information today.
Yeah, and I think one thing that gets lost when people take the programs or they leave the programs or they learn this somewhere else is that the rates of change for any particular technology, whether it be solar power or data over communication, those curves can shift and change. Many of you saw that the rate of gene sequencing was moving at about 5 times Moore's law. So every 18 months, it was becoming 1/10 of the cost. But that was moving basically at the rate of Moore's law, and then it shifted. And this is often because of converging technologies. But then it looks like it's shifting back and slowing down again. So the rates continuously move. It's important to check in every now and then, understand what's happening. And it is important to point out, we mentioned this before, it's not just about business. It's about all of these things: data, privacy, fake news, propaganda, whether it's democracy or currency risk or the environment. We're all living in a state where we have to be surfing this wave of disruption that's affecting every institution in our lives. And we have to maintain this state of dynamic stability and figure out how to be able to navigate it, to basically ensure that our family stay healthy, happy, and safe. And so that's the importance of that, regardless and independent of whether you're managing a business or not.
And I think this page is it's really worth mentioning here, just how the importance that many of the families that are already in our community have in being able to influence regulation, being able to influence governance in their local communities, in their local countries, along the lines of what's on here. And that's one of the things that we've heard very strongly from many members of our family community, that they have this unique position because they're an advisor to the government, in education, for example, and an ability to help influence at a greater rate, as Gabe, you mentioned before, some of the different and unique possibilities that families have in being able to drive the future. But this influential opportunity to be able to drive a national conversation or national regulation or government decisions along these areas. And the more that we're informed, the more that our families and our community are informed, the better that we'll be able to help ensure that we're seeing all of the positive benefits of technology and avoiding the downside risks.
Yeah, and the reality is if you have assets and you're stewarding assets for the family, then you are at greater risk if you're not paying attention to these things. So there's both the responsibility and opportunity side of it.
So, we talked a little bit about what some of the resources are. There's a page on the very end of this deck that has a list of various links and resources of things that we're going to be mentioning during this conversation. And you'll be able to access all of this. This will be available for download in a summary that will come out following the webinar. But the biggest points that we always make are like subscribe to some of SU's media sources. Singularity Hub does great long form and pieces on different technological or societal impacts. Highly recommend subscribing to Singularity Hub, as well as Futurism, which is a recent acquisition that we just brought into the SU fold over the last 6 months. Like these two, these two different media properties together provide a really great ongoing perspective of not only what's happening at a deep level of some of the technological research or societal implications, but also like a very up to the minute, what is happening in this piece of news that you need to read today about something that just happened over the last 24 hours.
And if you get your media from some other property, that's fine too. If you're reading MIT Tech Review, the important thing is that you take the time and you build it into your schedule that you can occasionally review those updates from whatever your source is.
Yeah, I think that's Gabe and I are like very much aligned. We're happy that SU is able to provide this kind of input and perspective for you on an ongoing basis. But the important thing is whatever your medium and wherever you're already connected, like MIT Technology Review, Wired, TED Talks, whatever it is, just stay up to date. And especially if you're able to find some passion areas, that's where we look at things like, on a quarterly basis, what are talks or webinars that you can find. There are a lot of micro courses that are popping up on a variety of different online education platforms that take a deeper dive into that if there's something that you find that you're really passionate about.
Or attend a chapter event locally. And then that's something, again, you have to build. This is what we recommend to build into your calendar. So you can, because if it's not in your calendar, it's not going to happen. A quarterly talk, a quarterly webinar, and then annually get an update 1 to 3 days. It might be something like the Global Summit where you're getting a broad review of technologies, or it might be a 2-day conference on blockchain where you want to do a deep dive that year. But dedicate some time and try to pick the things that might affect your businesses, industry, your region of the world where you live, and so that you've blocked the time to invest.
Yeah,
that's the key.
And I think that is a point worth really underlining. This part about dedicating time and this is not just advice of like stay up to date. It's really about dedicating time and writing it in your schedule, as you said, like plan now what you're going to be doing for the rest of 2019 and on into 2020. And one other thing that I'd offer here is, because this is about family, one of the things that's really important is how you start to bring other members of your family together for some of these different activities. And one thing that's going to be happening next week is our Global Summit. There's a link on the back of this as well to be able to sign up for a live stream. So if you want to sit down and watch some of the opening sessions with family members or talk about some of the specific sessions like a blockchain session, as you mentioned, that is going to be something that you can sign up for so that you're going to be able to sit down and talk through listen to those conversations and do it as a family and think about what the implications might be.
Yeah, that's actually a good transition to this concept of alignment. There's a great case study that we have of a family that had built a business over multiple decades in the grain industry. And 2 of the family members attended SU and had an idea to reinvent the family business, or not, to add to it. This was a AI-driven technology insight and an industry insight. which is really what we want people to do when they come to SU, is to take what they learned and figure out how to apply it to drive big innovation. Unfortunately, part of the family hadn't been with them on that journey and didn't really understand this perspective and why they wanted to do this. They had not come to SU. They didn't understand the exponential thinking or technologies. And there was a rift on the board that created a lot of tension. And these two family members went and created this company separately, independently, not using family assets. And it became worth as much as the core family business in about 3 years. Eventually, those tensions subsided, but it was an unnecessary tension, and it was much more difficult than it would have been. And so the takeaway there is, just like with boards or executive teams, if there are family members that you collaborate with on family businesses or family investments or other family activities like philanthropic activities. I know foundations and nonprofits that are helping train formerly homeless people to drive trucks, but they're not really thinking about when self-driving cars are going to happen and whether those people are going to have to be retrained again. So the key is, if you're going to think about trying to manage these things, make sure that any family members that are part of the key stakeholders making those decisions are taking that journey with you of staying current, and make sure that staying aligned is as important as staying current.
So I think that's a great segue into our next section here, which is about taking care of business.
Yeah. Number one is, if you have family businesses or family investments, you're not exempt. If you've been to SU before, you kind of know everything's being disrupted. I have Toto on here because we talk a lot about how gene sequencing will be cheaper than flushing a toilet if you extrapolate out the curve, and how the toilet companies are in a great position to do diagnostics and sequence your genome. And so, what does that mean for the diagnostics companies? And that same thing will play over in, all of the other industries, where industries that were not previously a threat or could move into your space are now able to, converging technologies. And so you can, there's the anxiety that comes with that. And there's the pressure to try to identify those risks. But then there's the opportunity. There's never been a better time for your family to be entrepreneurial and innovative, to be on the other side of that. There's only one takeaway, which is, you can't sit on the sidelines. You have to take an active approach. Otherwise, you are sitting on the sidelines. And so creating and preserving family wealth means that you are thinking about how your existing assets, whether they're sitting in the market or whether they're sitting in operating companies, are going to be affected, and investing the time to think and talk about that and try to come up with a plan for it. We often talk about the secondary and tertiary impacts of tech. So people think about 3D printing. They think about how plastic toys won't be shipped from China to the US. But they don't always think about, well, what is the impact on the shipping industry? What is the impact on the insurance companies that insure the ships? What percentage of shipping is that? And again, for every industry, you can play out those secondary and tertiary impacts of a technology for your business. Another important thing to mention for families is this typical journey that families go on. And your family might be anywhere in this journey, but you often have a generation that creates the wealth through real estate or finance or entrepreneurship or some other means. And then there's a transition to professional money management. And oftentimes what happens in that transition is that the focus shifts to preserving these assets and protecting them. And a much more conservative stance is taken. And it's consistent with the financial management industry. Again, I worked at Goldman Sachs, and the first thing you don't want to do is lose your assets. But if any of you are familiar with sports psychology, you know that when a team goes up and develops a significant lead over their opponent, they can sometimes really just shift to trying not to let the other team score, trying not to lose their lead. And sometimes they stop playing offense. And what happens with a lot of families is they stop participating in the activities that created the family wealth in the first place, and planting those new trees. And then, I think everyone's heard, and probably one of the most often cited stats in the investment management industry is that on average, families lose their wealth within 3 generations. The shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves quote. And it's because, preserving assets is fighting this headwind of family expansion. Kids have kids, and you get an exponential growth in the downline of family members, and then you have taxes. And those two together often lead to, not keeping up with, just financial investment preservation. But when you look at companies that make and create family wealth, these 3 companies, and we can all list many more, have been rendered, insignificant because of technology. And I think Virgin Megastore is a great example in that, that business had a good 40-year run until, records had shifted to all types of digital music and they were made obsolete. But I think Virgin is a great example of an organization and a family that had created other businesses, had planted other trees. And that's really important, especially when you look at how the acceleration of disruption and the life cycle of companies in the private market on the S&P continues to shorten. One thing you may want to think about is if you have a family business, how do you start to structure that business so that you separate whatever the activity it is today. Let's say you're in an energy business, or you're in a grain business, or an apparel business, and you start to prepare yourself to manage other businesses, the same way Google went from Google to Alphabet, and the same way that Virgin has made itself successful by sitting above the airline business or the record business and thinking about its portfolio of activities, recognizing that at any one time, something like a record business could be rendered obsolete, and the natural life cycle of corporations accelerating and businesses. Your family might want to think about how does it structure itself that way, and so it's not just continuing to be concentrated in a specific industry. Another thing to note is that if you have a family office with family office executives, their role is inherently typically not designed for wealth creation. It's typically a conservative role where it's a, cover your butt role, and you don't want to do anything that you can't defend, and that could get you fired. And so I think that the family office executives and the family have to realize that that is the nature of the way that that role is designed, and have to think about where does wealth creation continue to live in the family? Does it live in a specific family member if one of them wants to be entrepreneurial? And being an entrepreneur is brutal and grueling, even if you have family assets to start with. So it's not for everyone. But if it doesn't live there, then where does it live? Does it live with a partner? Does it live another way? But certainly, I think the family office executive and the family should be having that conversation about how to align incentives. And that wealth creation can refresh family assets over time. We're going to talk about how it can achieve other things as well, especially now. We've talked about wealth creation and we've talked about wealth preservation. And really, I think the big insight is not just to think about those two, but to think about wealth utilization, the why. And it's really about impact and legacy. And when we talk about taking care of business in Exponential Families, we also mean taking care of the world in some way. You can call that impact, you can call that legacy, but it's a success to significance as a family. And that's not really just us imbuing our values on the purpose of wealth or assets. It turns out that it's not just a service to others, but it actually creates value for the family members. Many of you are familiar with the research that shows that, above some number around $70,000 per year, happiness is not actually associated with increased wealth. It's actually associated with 5 other things, like health, wisdom, community and family, purpose, and giving back. And purpose and giving back are actually 2 significant drivers of happiness. And so a lot of families that are missing that purpose, when they no longer have to think about where a lot of families spend their time, which is how are we going to create retirement money? How are we going to pay off the house? How are we going to send kids to school? And when that's gone, oftentimes consumption becomes inadequate as a motivator for people, and you get a lot of negative side effects in family members in the next generation when that vacuum is there about the purpose. What's really exciting now is that the decreasing cost of technology has created the biggest opportunity in history to have impact with business, to align doing well and doing good. You can call it business as a force for good. Michael Porter calls it shared value, but we're moving away from the world of we make money over here and then we write checks to charities over here. And whether it's stem cells or the family that I mentioned before, who's used AI to decrease costs and save cows and in the food supply chain, or Modern Meadow, who's trying to produce enough leather from the whole world from one cow without killing it using tissue engineering, to a host of others in alternative energy. Many of these businesses have the opportunity to have huge impact and increase family assets in a way that wasn't possible before. And so you have this really strong alignment that isn't just about creating assets. It isn't just about some responsibility to have impact on the world. It's about filling a vacuum and a void in a family that leads to increased happiness.
And I think it's worth building on this point. If you go back and reflect upon what we talked about as our own massive transformative purpose, to be the leading global community of families that think exponentially and leverage exponential technologies to create a better future for us all, that is this idea of wealth utilization, I think, is something that will uniquely speak to the families that we see as part of our community. So it might not be for every family, right? We think it's something that will bring together people that are part of our Exponential Families network and really fit the profile of people that we're building this for. And one of the things that we've talked about with several families and with the programs that we've done so far is to really spend some time thinking about what is your family's massive transformative purpose. So for those of you that have been around the SU community for a long time, you'll be familiar with the idea of a massive transformative purpose, or an MTP. It's something that, as you see on this slide, it's audaciously big and aspirational. It's got the possibility of causing a significant transformation for an industry, the community, or the planet, and that there's a real why behind it, something that's meaningful and gets people excited. And what we've seen a lot is that in conversations with different families, there is a MTP that is kind of a natural MTP amongst the first generation and the second generation. But by the time it gets down to the third generation, because of the expansion of the family that Gabe mentioned and kind of the distance from the original entrepreneurial spirit that built the family's enterprises in the first place, it can get lost. So there's a couple of reasons that we think this is really important. One is to be able to, either A, just kind of realign the family around what the purpose may be. And that may still be as valid today as it was, 50 years ago. And it might have shifted a little bit as the families really understood more about what their unique role is in society. And, we also acknowledge that sometimes that one of the great benefits of being a family that has been successful is that you're able to empower everybody in this next generation to pursue their own massive transformative purpose, which may or may not be directly aligned together. I think that the important part about this is to start thinking about having this conversation and determining, is there a specific alignment that the family wants to work toward? Or are there several different MTPs that this, subsequent generation has that you can either look for alignment or mutual support toward, and thinking about how can you help everybody in that generation to be able to achieve their specific impact in the world. Because the thing that's most important to us is that people are able to go out and leave their mark and leave their legacy and create a better world for everybody, however that might be. And the focused work on spending time talking about the MTP for the family or its members really is important in being able to uncover, have that conversation, illuminate it, and be able to figure out what the next steps in the so what's For those of you that are not familiar with an MTP, the next page here just has some examples of what some successful ones are. There's a great article on Singularity Hub that talks about massive transformative purpose. I'll go ahead and put that link into the final page here as well. But here are all examples like Google's is organize the world's information, the X Prize Foundation, bring about radical breakthroughs for the benefit of humanity. They all have this common theme of being big, audacious, and inspiring to people. And that's really what we think is the most important takeaway from this section.
Yeah, you'll often hear a shift now from people who teach K through 12 to not asking, what do you want to be when you grow up? But what problems do you want to work on in the world? And that's really consistent with that mission. So the next topic we'll talk about is taking care of the family. And as we mentioned, this really starts with the next generation. Raising successful children is a challenge for every family. And then if you are a family who's been successful, it's often more difficult in different ways. There is no shortage of consultants and authors and experts out there to try to help manage some of the issues, whether it's loss of incentive or motivation or pressure of intimidation to live up to parents. There is a whole cottage industry, and it is a challenge. I have this doorknob photo here because there's often a disconnect between the next generation not wanting to get involved in the family business because they consider it boring or uninspiring. And this is the, doorknobs are boring. And then the response of you're too good for doorknobs paid for your college, doorknobs paid for this house. And then the kid says, I want to do crypto or something else. And that disconnect is often an issue. But really, I think most people just want to have their kids passionate, inspired, and finding some calling as productive members of society that makes them healthy and help them achieve that. But still always a challenge. And I think one thing that we found as we've worked with youth over the years is that they respond really in inspiring ways to technology. We ran several exponential youth camps for 4 weeks over the summer for 14 to 17-year-olds at SU several years ago. We also started running Exponential Families, and we're the only program that takes age 14 and up. We take the entire family as a unit. We have one family coming with 10 people. We've had a family with 9 people, but that includes teenagers. And this story here behind Disaster Mesh was 3 16-year-old girls who met in our 4-week program. We let them sit in with adults in our GSP program and didn't expect much. But these 3 created a company which floated small electronics down from helicopters that automatically created a Wi-Fi network, a mesh network, over an earthquake zone or other disaster zone. And they went off to Rome to present it. And it really caught everyone by surprise. We actually have another 14-year-old that was in one of our programs, came out and also started a company. And her father said it was really the most impactful thing he's ever done for his daughter. So the question about whether or not the teenagers will be able to handle the information in the classroom, or whether the speakers and expert faculty will have to tone it down or simplify it, I think we learned very quickly that the teenagers picked it up a lot faster than we did and ran with it.
Well, and I think to that point, ironically, when we've run programs for families, one of the things that we've seen is that it's then the younger generation that is explaining some of the concepts to the older generation, which is actually a great example of this, intergenerational collaboration that we're seeing in the SU programs, and also that we think is really important. Whereas some of the people of the younger generation might not, understand enough about business and investments compared to some of the older generation. They are digital natives. They're technology first generations, and the opportunity to be able to elevate and illuminate that knowledge and understanding as an important input to the family's perspective about where they're going, where technology is going to be leading them, is not only important to be able to provide that perspective, but it's also important to be able to start showing younger people the impact and the role that they can play in moving their family forward, right? It's not just you have to wait until you're 30 when you can start to take on a senior role at a company. It's being able to get younger people involved and taking advantage of what they're uniquely likely going to be really good at, which is understanding technology and being able to see some of the impacts that they're already living with every day.
Yeah, and there's another thing here to point out, which is by giving the next generation this insight along with the previous generations, you build a bridge. You build a bridge where they now have a shared perspective of the future. They have a shared foundation. And so whether it's the family doorknob business, they now can have a conversation about biometrics, eye scanning, are doorknobs about access or security? How do things change? And that allows multiple generations to have a conversation in a way that addresses some of those challenges that we've historically seen. So it's reinventing the older generation as well as inspiring the younger generation who might want to eschew any discussions. We have seen families come out of our programs where family members are now joining monthly family strategy calls where they were not before. And it's been a really positive response. So do not be afraid to drag them into it, quite the opposite. If they seem unresponsive, this may be the thing that wakes them up. I think in summary, you'll see the images on here and the link below is a sci-fi DI workshop, which is one of a series that we're doing for the Global Grand Challenges. And it's a group from our community that came together to use a process that we use to design in a graphic novel what the future of an industry or area may look like. And in this case, it was the future of education. So we produced this graphic novel. You can download it at the link here. And this group basically workshopped what education will look like in the future. Education is undergoing incredible disruption right now. Singularity University is one small part of that. The internet is part of it, but there are also some other issues with costs and the way people learn, and whether moving to lifelong learning and a flipped classroom, and innovation that has been long overdue in ensuring people that learn faster, more effectively, more efficiently, and that it's more accessible around the world. So you should understand how education is changing to ensure how you're accessing it for the next generation. The other thing is you should expose them to content and thinking about impact, about global issues. And youth really are already driving the environment discussion and protesting globally, which is a great thing. But make sure you're introducing them to those whole ideas about what's possible to change and how empowered they can be in today's world. I think another important thing is getting them achieving early and exploring ventures early. That doesn't mean a startup, it means building something, building anything. The feeling of building something, even if they are going to go one day and build a magazine for social justice or do something that's a nonprofit or any initiative, that sense of agency and self-empowerment from building something is super important to start early, because then the question about comfort with doing that is eradicated by the time they get to their teens and early adulthood. And then finally, introduce them to a breadth of technologists, entrepreneurs, and big thinkers early and often. That's very validating, it's reinforcing, it's modeling behavior when the people that you're introduced to are doers, whatever that is. And again, they can apply this to any passion that they have. They can apply that same thing, whether it's reinventing banking or new skateboards that are safer. That's really up to them where they want to point those abilities and that understanding, know-how, and confidence, but exposing them to those right people. And we think these are some of the important things that you want to do. The last area is not only helping the previous generation and the more senior members of the family increase their life, their quality of life, but healthcare can affect anyone in the family at any age. And for me, this is one of the most exciting things. People ask me about the most exciting technologies that are advancing. AI is always exciting, but healthcare as an application area, for me, is the thing I'm most excited about in the world today. And it's because there's so much going on. Immunotherapy right now is racing to advances in the way we manage cancer. CRISPR has expanded beyond Cas9 into a host of other derivative CRISPR technologies for editing DNA. And now we're seeing base pair editing, where a single nucleic acid can be replaced in vitro. And there's teams around the world working on that and trying to get it to a high enough quality that's reliable and dependable. But that will mean, really wiping out a lot of the genetic diseases, if not all of the genetic diseases. Stem cell treatments are getting ready to hit the market. And you should expect to see that soon, whether it's for longevity or addressing specific organ issues. And then what's happening with AI and drug discovery is really fascinating, and really being applied to go to the extent of calculating potential combinations to address drugs that humans could not, in a whole new way. And we're seeing some of the big AI, whether it's Watson or DeepMind or Google, focusing now on healthcare, and other AIs focusing on drug discovery. Designer proteins is probably one of the most exciting on this list for me. And I think, not well understood by people, but the human body uses about 20,000 proteins to do everything that we do. And it operates and runs our body. But, that's a very tiny fraction of the proteins that could be made, and that nature has made because of evolution. We are now discovering and creating the ability to create our own proteins and use AI to design proteins that will do anything we want, which could mean a universal flu vaccine for any kind of flu, and a host of other incredible improvements for humanity. Alzheimer's, mental health, and all of those are again, advancing at incredible rates that are important to track for your family periodically, whether it's attending exponential medicine or checking in online, but knowing, and your doctor is not always going to know, because the wave front of breakthroughs in all of these different areas is moving so quickly that it's really hard for physicians to keep track of all of this. So make a note of tracking it yourself. Staying up to speed.
I think in our exponential family community, there are a number of people who are going to be able to not only stay ahead of this, but also be early adopters of some of these different technologies, or early experimenters with some of these different technologies as well. And I think that, and I think, Gabe, you've got some examples here on the next page of some organizations to keep track of, or to be in contact with, to be able to understand more about some of the cutting edge work that they're already starting to be able to provide to patients.
Yeah, this is just two examples. Next Biotics is a startup that came out of one of SU's programs, and they're actually engineering viruses to attack resistant bacteria. For those of you who know, one of the big concerns is that the age of antibiotics is at risk, as we're starting to see multiple resistant bacteria that is resistant to multiple strains of antibiotics. We don't really have an answer for this yet. There are different approaches being taken, but engineering viruses to attack those is another great example. And we're very excited about that company. Singularity is a company that our co-founder Peter was also a part of, which is really taking stem cell advances and treatments to the next level. So expect to see more out of them as well. And there's many, many more. We just chose these two as examples for what's happening in healthcare in the SU community.
Yeah. So there's a lot of really important and interesting opportunity to be able to keep people healthier, keep the older generations around longer. And there are going to be implications for exactly. There's a lot of implications for what that means for families in a lot of ways, to disrupt this pattern of youth getting older and eventually dying, as we think about what that means for how an entire family works together, and the wisdom and the eldership that can perhaps last longer as we continue to have these breakthroughs and expand into the future. So that really takes us through this part of the webinar. We're going to transition to some Q&A for, we've got some questions that have already come in. This is a list of resources that's going to be available to you. The Futurism and Singularity Hub, media and news outlets. some links and email address for Exponential Families if you want to be in touch with our XFAM team and learn more. Global Summit, there's a live stream link, as well as if for anyone who's on this call, if we have a special XFAM discount code, if anybody's still has not yet bought tickets, to go ahead and do so using this code GS19XFAM15. And with getting younger people involved, a great way to do that is to get engaged with your local chapter. You can find a list of those at the global.su.org website, or search for the SU app in the Apple App Store. Get involved, get your young people to a chapter where they can meet the technologists and the entrepreneurs and the people that are doing really interesting things. And as Gabe mentioned before, the Future of Learning sci-fi ebook, graphic novel, is located at this link. So we hope you'll be able to access that and check that out as well.
So we want to talk a little bit about what we're going to do. Recognizing the need for families to focus on these pillars, we really want to design Exponential Families to meet that need. We're running a program August 19th through 22 at the Global Summit. We've run several already. We're continuing to iterate them. And if you want to participate in our next 3-day program, it's November 14th through 16th in Silicon Valley. You can find the page on SU website. We also have the link in this presentation when we send it out. And you'll be able to see a video about the past program there, learn more. Our email's here. You can contact us. In addition to these 3-day programs, we're working with partners who are at advisory firms, on doing private programs just for groups of families. So that's an option as well, if you'd like to do that with a family, or if you are with a firm. And then finally, we're going to be launching a digital portal so that we can continue to support these content pillars on an ongoing basis for families, passing out breakthroughs, facilitating conversations, making connections on these things, so it doesn't happen just when we're sitting together in a room, but happens virtually on an ongoing basis as our families are out in the world.
So with that, I know we've got some questions that have come in over the last hour. And I'll go ahead and just start asking, reading a few of these off. One of them is a great question that we've talked a lot about. Could a family capture exponential opportunities on its own, or should they team together and network with other families to be more effective? And how to best team across borders?
I think that's a great example. And you almost have to narrow down the universe of opportunities. First of all, we do want to create that network of families. And that's part of the reason we want to launch this portal. So on any given situation, you might ask yourselves who in the network is valuable for this opportunity. Is it a business partner? Is it an expert in a specific area? Is it someone in government that's in the network who can help facilitate an initiative? And opportunistically, as long as we create those connections and we allow that network to build and everyone to understand what's happening on any of those, you can assess who are the best partners in the network, if any, for you on that initiative.
And right up front, we use the word community very intentionally, right? And it is to be able to encourage these kinds of inter-family collaborations. We believe that, as a group, as a community, we're going to be able to get farther faster than if everyone's trying to do it on their own.
Yeah, and we've already seen families meeting in the program who are on other sides of the world that are collaborating because they have completely different experiences in different industries. But they're both thinking exponentially now, and they're identifying joint opportunities.
Another question that had come in: what could be the right approach related to family investments? If we talk about new technologies, should families start investing in VC funds and startups in order to stay up to date and to be able to see all the changes that happen in different areas?
Yeah, I think that there's almost a couple of questions bundled in and conflated there. I think staying up to date and seeing all the changes that happen in different areas can be achieved just by kind of tracking startups, who's investing in them, and participating in different sources of content, conferences, media, the type we're talking about. So that's how you can stay. I think every family needs to have their own asset allocation. Most families will have a place for alternative investments and a place for VC funds. My personal opinion on this is that your alternative asset and alternative investments as part of your asset allocation should be distinct from your wealth creation activities. And that's really about a portfolio that preserves capital versus planting new trees. And so I think inherent in that question, direct equity investments, I think, are interesting. I actually wrote a white paper on direct equity investments. It's a longer topic than this call, but if you want to have that conversation, email me, and I'd be happy to have it on how you might want to approach entrepreneurship in the family office, which was the title of my white paper, largely driven by my experience with Richard Branson and other family offices that did that.
Well, and I think to build on that, this part about venture investing from a family office standpoint is one of the places that we've seen a lot of conflict between generations, where one generation is really focused on more private equity investments and the younger generation is more focused on venture investments. And I think that speaks back to your point about alignment, the importance of alignment, the importance of allocating out your capital to be able to be earmarked for different activities. And also, in a lot of cases, back to what is your MTP as a family, because that will help you to be able to drive some of these decisions as well. Another question that was on here, why are we focused on families and not communities? I would love to understand a little bit more about that question. I think my initial reaction to it is, families provide the backbone of communities. So certainly, while today we're talking about family businesses and family offices, part of our longer term vision is to be able to, empower every family everywhere to be able to start thinking about what their future is and how they can prepare their young people to be successful.
And I would also say that we have been serving communities for 5 years now. We have 173 chapters in cities around the world. And that program of licensing our brand and empowering chapters was designed to support local communities and build an SU ecosystem. Last night, Chipp and I attended the meeting of the Miami chapter, where they were talking about their strategy. Incredibly impressive group of people. We had PhDs in neuroscience. We had great entrepreneurs, people doing impact projects, talking about how they're going to build an SU community. And so SU has an initiative for communities, and it really is chapter summits and other things we're doing. We started this because we didn't feel there was something focused on families in particular as institutions, the needs and opportunities. But we're excited to partner with chapters ourselves and find synergies there.
And if there is more to that question than we're able to discern, please do go ahead and send that follow-up question to the two of us, and we'll be happy to answer. Our emails are going to be on the last page of this. And then there's another question here is, what is your opinion about universal basic income in this context?
My opinion is that is a very long and interesting conversation. I would go back to the slide where we talked about surfing disruption of our institutions, whether it's government, economic institutions, social institutions. Technology in an accelerating way is disrupting some of the basic foundations of how we operate in society. The conversation about universal basic income is largely driven by technological unemployment, an increased wealth gap, an increasing skills gap, and an education system that has not been innovated in a way to keep up with that. And then some people would argue that the human brain hasn't been upgraded enough to keep up with that. So it's inevitable that universal basic income has to be a bigger and bigger conversation as the means of production is not evenly distributed across individuals. And we have to think about how we distribute the means of production in society when they become more concentrated.
My only build on that is to say that I think that's a perfect example of something that a family or young people or entrepreneurs in a family would be in a great position to try and investigate and understand more about. I don't think that we necessarily have the solution on any of this. But the important thing is that we're having the conversation, and that there are people that are going to be, in a position to be able to, really chase down the ideas and the opportunities to be able to solve some of these challenges.
Yeah, in a lot of countries around the world, it's not the people that are out working 17 hours a day that are going to be able to think about or do anything about that question for their country, state, or region. But it is the leading families that are going to be in the best position to try to have that conversation about what it'll mean for their region, universal basic income. And that's what we want to enable.
So I think that brings us to the end of our hour. And first of all, I want to just say thank you all for joining us on this webinar. We're looking forward to having more of these in the future. And if you want to be in touch with us, our email addresses are going to be in here. Our XFAM email address is in here as well. We hope that you reach out to us. We want to be in a conversation with you about things that may be ideas that are born out of this conversation, because for us, this is really about just engaging our exponential family community and being able to continue to move, all of us forward in creating a better world around us. So thank you again for being here. Gabriel,
thank you, everyone.
It
was a pleasure. I look forward, hope to engage with many of you in building this community and having huge impact in the world.
Cool. All right. Thank you all very much. Look forward to talking to you again soon.